we go. All right. Well, we're honored to join you all today to highlight critical human rights abuses that are experienced by women in the United States. My name is Denise Labertu of Women Lead Network and faculty at the California State University, Northridge in the Criminology and Justice Studies Department. I'm joined by my Women Lead Network colleagues, Kimberly Wong, who help us understand the impact of trauma, Leona Smith DiFaustino, who will talk to us about the role that labor plays in developing women's capacity, and Abby Sims, who's going to help us on the back end with the technology, keeping our community safe and engaged. Women Lead Network is a collective of women who work to ensure that women's needs are central in discussions about world problems and that they are engaged as leaders in solutions to those problems. This includes all those who identify as women, as well as femme, gender non-binary, and other birthing folks. We also acknowledge that we're not the first women to work towards increasing women's power and stand with other women who've come before us, stand alongside us, and will create a future where women around the world enjoy human dignity and freedoms. Finally, we recognize that we've built our lives and homes on the unceded territory of Indigenous Californians and acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, recognizing that the First Peoples of the land are still here and are committed to lifting up their stories, culture, and community. So today, in addition to being joined by my colleagues, Kimberly, Leona, and Abby, we'll also connect to the work of students at the California State University Northridge Department of Criminology and Justice Studies in the Human Rights, Crime, and Justice course, who've been engaged in deep learning on these issues. We also will hear from Lily Gonzalez of CSUN's Project Rebound, who will help us to understand the impact of incarceration on women and strategies to supplant incarceration to address gendered social problems. We acknowledge and appreciate the leadership and advocacy of women prisoners and survivors themselves, who have worked tirelessly to ensure that we are all aware of the experiences of their sisters. And we're here today to both provide a platform for these issues to be raised in UN forums and to recognize their work thus far. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce the problem. Social protection systems are mechanisms that help poor and vulnerable people cope with crises and shocks, find jobs, and invest in health and education for their children. Programs that reduce economic inequality can create a social safety net that can have profound protective impacts, especially on women who are the most vulnerable, including queer women, poor women, and women of color. This is especially true for those who encounter the American criminal legal system, including survivors of gender-based violence, those who are incarcerated or system involved, and those who are re-entering society after a carceral sentence. Gender-based violence is an epidemic globally, as well as in the US. Almost half of all women in the United States have or will experience gender-based violence. While the United States holds most of the wealth of any country, access to supportive services for survivors of gender-based violence are limited. Women in poverty are more likely to experience gender-based violence, including domestic abuse, sexual violence, and sexual harassment, and the effects are more severe. Poverty and a lack of access to social protection has been linked to an increased risk of gender-based violence for women, and experiencing gender-based violence is one of the top causes of homelessness for women and children in many parts of the country. Gender-based violence can lead to poor performance and absenteeism at work, homelessness, and economic loss from using the American insurance system to treat the resulting physical and psychological injuries, leading to women's poverty, worsening women's economic position. Social protection programs like paid leave and affordable housing can help to mitigate both the prevalence and impact of gender-based violence. Additionally, the United States has the largest carceral system in the world, and while only 10% of the prison population are women, their incarceration rates have increased 2 to 4 times faster than their male counterparts over the last 3 to 4 decades, due to the gendered effects of schemes like the war on drugs, mandatory arrest policies for domestic violence, and the criminalization of sex work. Incarcerated women are disproportionately poor, lacking access to social protection mechanisms that can mitigate the impact of arrest as a crisis in their lives and the lives of their children. A vast majority of all people who are incarcerated will return to their communities, including women, and more than 5 out of 6 will be rearrested within a decade of their release because of barriers faced to successful reentry, including getting employment, stable housing, and going to school. Data on women's reentry shows that formerly incarcerated women have higher rates of unemployment and homelessness and are less likely to have a high school education. And because more women are housed in jails instead of prisons, they are less likely to have access to prison programs that support their successful reentry back into the community. Without these programs, women's likelihood of successful reentry is severely diminished. So, what is the US's obligation to address these problems? International customary law lays out the reality faced by survivors of gender-based violence and recognizes that this is a global issue that is being addressed around the world. The US has regularly implemented laws that recognize and criminalize a variety of forms of gender-based violence, including the Violence Against Women Act, but continue to fail to meet their obligations in protecting women from these harms. Additionally, while the US has not ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which explicitly requires states to protect women from gender-based violence, it's a signatory, obliging it to act in good faith towards CEDAW's ratification and to follow its guidance until that ratification is secured. This means that the US has a duty to develop and implement social protection strategies that increase access to affordable housing, childcare, and parental leave that have the potential to protect women from gender-based violence and reduce the impact if it occurs. In addition, the US has consistently and openly advocated for the Sustainable Development Goals, which include a commitment to expanding economic opportunity and advancing social justice, and has emphasized its effort to save lives, reduce poverty, and help people emerge from humanitarian crises. Social protection schemes that reduce or remove the cost of education and increase access to free and comprehensive health care can lift women and girls out of poverty, which is a driver of contact with the criminal legal system and ultimately incarceration, resulting in a humanitarian crisis in women's lives. Additionally, expanding access to social protection schemes that lift women out of poverty, ensuring that existing social protection mechanisms are revisioned using a gendered lens and meeting the needs of women is a critical step. For example, women are disproportionately concentrated in temporary work, contract work, and on-call work, and many unemployment insurance programs exclude individuals doing this kind of work from accessing benefits. Also, the first rule under the United Nations Rules for the Treatment of Women Prisoners and Non-Custodial Measures for Women Offenders is to keep women out of prison, including eliminating pretrial detention and increasing the use of post-conviction sentencing schemes that are gender sensitive. Access to diversion programs that keep women out of prison can serve as a social protection, preventing women's incarceration and promoting the well-being of women, their families, and communities. The Sustainable Development Goals also requires a commitment to quality education, good health and well-being, decent work and economic growth, and gender equality, obliging the United States to ensure access to these opportunities for all its people, including and especially women. For women reentering society after incarceration, social protection that ensures employment access, like a ban-the-box approach, doing away with questions related to criminal backgrounds at the application stages of employment, or support programs during their education like Project Rebound can be critical to women's economic well-being after the crisis of incarceration. It's important to acknowledge the goals of ensuring comprehensive social protection across the lifespan. Children need access to nutrition, education, and healthcare services in order to ensure their health and well-being, especially when their mothers have experienced gender-based violence or are incarcerated. Additionally, it's important to recognize that a significant number of women are serving sentences that are long in proportion to their crimes and may need to leave the carceral system and may not leave the carceral system until they're elderly. An approach to social protection that ensures that incarceration doesn't prevent their access to pensions or Social Security is critical. Many incarcerated people who are sentenced as juveniles or didn't work in quote unquote legitimate industries may be precluded from accessing Social Security or other benefits they need as seniors. The Sustainable Development Goals highlight the global priority of ending poverty, eliminating gender inequality, and decent work and economic growth for all. The United States has consistently made commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals and addressing poverty and gender inequality internationally. It's time for the US to hold a mirror up to itself and focus on the Sustainable Development Goals and their achievement here. Additionally, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women emphasizes the global goal of eradicating gender inequality and notes that all state parties should strive towards that goal through equality, education, employment, health, and economic and social benefits. And although the United States has not ratified CEDAW, as a signatory, it's made a commitment to uphold the principles of CEDAW and work towards its ratification. Each United Nations recommendation related to social protection has noted the importance of a consistent social protection floor, quote, tailored to the national circumstances. The United States is the richest country in the world with the largest proportion of millionaires and billionaires comparatively. The US also has the most income inequality with the largest economic gaps between those that are very rich and those that are very poor. The United States has the capacity to have a consistent social protection scheme in which the floor can accommodate the needs of all women. So this requires that we contemplate who really has access to the American dream and whether a lack of community investment in social protection programs makes the American dream completely inaccessible to the most vulnerable, especially women. So today we're going to hear from a variety of experts on these topics, all of whom are involved in doing the work of human rights advocacy. While it's important to acknowledge that women's resistance movements have been an equitizing factor in gains made for women in the United States, we also recognize that we cannot fully engage in a true discussion on advocacy for women without also understanding the impact of trauma, both interpersonally and systemically. On an interpersonal level, trauma from gender-based violence, including that violence perpetrated by the state, can impact the way that women respond to incidents of abuse and affect their self-perception. At a systemic level, living with poverty, sexism, racism, homophobia, and misogyny, and within carceral settings can have an insidious effect on women's lived experiences and worldview, compounding their reactions to interpersonal trauma. Kimberly Wong, an expert in trauma resilience, will help us to understand the impacts of trauma on women who experience poverty, gender-based violence, and carceral violence. We'll also hear today from Leona Smith, Di Faustino, Clinical Director of Worker Education and Resource Center, on an organization whose mission reflects the goals of ensuring access to decent work and economic growth outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals. Leona will discuss some of her work her organization does to ensure women have access to decent work and economic stability, as well as their efforts to ensure formerly incarcerated people can access jobs that can prevent poverty. Lily Gonzalez from Project Rebound at California State University Northridge will talk about the impact of incarceration on women and the important role education plays in reentry and preventing poverty. Finally, we'll also hear from students at California State University Northridge's Criminology and Justice Studies Department, Human Rights, Crime, and Justice class who've been studying these issues and will share their findings related to the United States human rights obligations in addressing and preventing the topics we've just mentioned. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly and ask her to help us contextualize these topics within women's experiences with trauma. Kimberly received her master's in social welfare from UCLA in 1993 and has over 3 decades of experience both in community social work and in private practice. She specializes in trauma with extensive experience working with survivors of sexual and domestic violence. Ms. Wong uses a multicultural, feminist, and empowerment-based approach that fosters independence and resilience and brings a deep understanding of how layers of culture and society shape individuals. She's certified as a trauma resiliency model practitioner and facilitator and has actively contributed to the equity, diversity, and inclusion work of the Trauma Resource Institute. Committed to community social work, Ms. Wong worked with the Los Angeles Commission on Assaults Against Women and at AIDS Healthcare Foundation, supporting people with HIV and AIDS. She's taught at the MSW program at Cal State Northridge and is trained in counseling techniques utilizing art and meditation and therapy, trauma, and multicultural issues. Thank you, Kimberly, for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Denise. I'm excited to be here. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice in Southern California. And I do want to say that I first gained my experience working in trauma over 30 years ago as a volunteer crisis counselor and advocate, working with survivors of gender-based violence, specifically sexual and domestic violence. This really influenced my multicultural, feminist, and empowerment approach through working with survivors. Over the last 10 years, I've been using the trauma resiliency model known as TRIM, and it is a somatic or body-based model, which understands how trauma impacts the body and brain and the biological survival responses. As mentioned, I am a TRIM practitioner through the Trauma Resource Institute. And this model is trauma-informed and resiliency-informed. And there's a perspective shift to this, in that the conventional perspective is that people are bad and need to be punished, i.e. the carceral system. And so the thoughts behind the conventional perspective is that what's wrong with you? Being trauma-informed acknowledges that people are suffering and that there's an understanding that trauma impacts development, the brain and the body. And so the question is more what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. And that there's an understanding of survival responses and that they're biological and protective. And there's a shift from looking at biology versus the idea of mental weakness, because everybody has a nervous system. So the next step is resiliency informed. And this idea is that people are resilient. People can learn. There may be a need for opportunities for support so that they can learn. And this leads to the idea of the social protection. And so the questions are more, what is right with you and what are your strengths? Now, resiliency there have been moments when it's been used against communities by saying they're resilient, so they don't need support. And I'm not coming from that perspective. The resiliency perspective is that there's compassion and empathy. You can acknowledge individual and collective strengths as well as acknowledge individual and collective suffering. And there's a look to being solution focused and the embodiment of well-being and gaining hope. Now, in talking about stress and trauma, I am going to talk about trauma broadly rather than the clinical definition of post-traumatic stress disorder. That there are common reactions that affect a person's body, mind, and spirit. And we know that physically, there are reactions and common reactions such as problems with sleep or appetite or being numb. And this also goes to, I talked about the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that keeps us alive and does things without conscious thought, like breathing, heartbeat. And so when people experience trauma, oftentimes this can impact the autonomic nervous system, in which maybe the heart rate races or breathing, difficulty breathing. Emotionally, people often feel fear and anxiety, anger, rage, guilt and depression, shame. In terms of impact, thoughts, people become forgetful. Maybe they have memory loss. There could be negative thoughts about the world or themselves, dissociation or nightmares. In terms of behavior reactions, people isolate. There can be anger outbursts, self-injury, addiction as a way of trying to cope. And then this leads to that idea of like the criminalization of drugs, and people ended up maybe being incarcerated because of their trauma and trying to cope. There's an impact on relationships, as well as a spiritual impact. Lots of people lose hope, or there could be changes in faith. Now, those are some of the more obvious impact of trauma and stress. And from a resiliency-informed perspective, not that trauma happens for a reason, but when people survive things, there's often a lot of growth. And so oftentimes people do advocacy, do this work. There's can be an understanding or recognition of their own courage or strength, renewed hope, compassion for self and others, or even the development of new meanings. Many people have heard of ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And what this is a study done many years ago through Kaiser, which looked at various childhood experiences like incarceration of a relative, mental illness, abuse, neglect, substances, and how that can have an impact on a person as they become an adult. And what they did find is that the more of these experiences a person has, that it was also linked to problems with adult health, mental and physical health, sometimes leading to drug use or shorter lifespan. And that the reality is that this has an impact on the development of the person's brain and body. Now, you can also look at it more broadly. That was a specific study. But if you think of adverse community experiences, this can include things like poverty, poor housing, discrimination, the pandemic, food insecurity, or lack of economic opportunity. And if I didn't say discrimination, then like discrimination as well. Now, the other thing is what happened is another study was done called PACEs, which is instead of ACEs being adverse childhood experiences, there's positive childhood experiences by Bethel and others, where they looked at these positive experiences such as a sense of belonging in high school, or having supportive friends, or enjoying participation in community traditions, or being able to talk to family about feelings, or having a supportive non-parent adult in their life. And what they found is that these PACEs, the positive childhood experiences, could reduce the impact of the adverse childhood experiences, meaning adversity is not destiny and that there can be hope. And this also highlights the importance of things such as social protections. Now, trauma in a generic definition is looking at the trauma in terms of big T trauma is the individual's perception of an event as life-threatening. So like war or violence. And perception is key, because people can go have the same experience, and one person may perceive it as a threat to safety and life, and another person may not, and their experiences will be different. There is a continuum of stress. There are stressors throughout life. There could be some mild stress that we can get over things quickly. The tolerable stress, which is an adaptive response to a time-limited stressor, and we can achieve balance again through support. And then there's toxic stress, which are intense stressors and intense body responses that can change or impact the way the brain functions. And in terms of toxic stress and trauma, there's different kinds. There could be things like what's considered a shock trauma or stress, which is something occurring too much, too fast. Gender-based violence, sexual assault, a natural disaster. It could be a shock trauma. Developmental toxic stress could be something that goes on that's too little for too long. And this includes things like neglect, poverty, or racism, individual and systemic racism. And there can also be developmental and shock combined, which is too much for too long. And this could be ongoing gender-based violence, ongoing sexual abuse, physical abuse. And there can be, both of the developmental traumas can include intergeneration and historical trauma. Historical trauma is like the multi-generational trauma experienced by a specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group. And this would include things like slavery or the Holocaust, forced migration, or the violent colonization of Native Americans. Intergenerational trauma is the theory that trauma can be transferred in between generations. Now, we already talked about the impact of stress and trauma on the body and things that can happen and how it can impact people's development. And so this idea is that offspring can be affected by parental trauma or stress exposure. And if you think of a person who is pregnant and is experiencing some gender-based violence, this could impact the fetus in utero. So that's some of the idea of what intergenerational trauma is. And we know that there are life experiences that are stressful, and there could be big T traumas, little t traumas, cumulative and developmental. I've already talked about gender-based violence, war. There could be systemic oppression of racism or sexism, homophobia, transphobia. So in terms of like racism, we think about law enforcement targeting Black and brown folks or other people of color, which could lead into incarceration. And sexism can occur in terms of like lack of bodily autonomy or forced sterilization, or not being able to access gender affirming procedures. Other stressors I've mentioned: incarceration, natural disasters, poverty, and not having lack of resources and options. So lastly, I want to talk about survival responses, which are protective. They're biological, they're automatic. And again, when we're talking about a big T trauma, is that there's a perception of life-threatening and threat to safety. And what can happen is that our brains can create templates of survival responses and how to respond to other situations, that where the survival brain kicks in and not the thinking brain. It's the things that happen automatically. Now, many people know about fight and flight, and I talked about the autonomic nervous system and racing heart, what the body does to prepare you for fighting or fleeing, mobilizing the large muscle groups. So something else I wanted to put is that if somebody who's in a situation of gender-based violence fights back, then there could be this criminalization of survivorship. Another survival response, which is not talked about as much, is what's called tend and befriend. And this is from an attachment focus, where the automatic survival response might be tending to take care of children or people who are vulnerable. It could be connecting to community, like the idea of safety in numbers. It could also be befriending the person who's harming you and creating an attachment, because this ensures a higher likelihood of survival. Again, automatic survival brain responses. And then freeze comes up often when fighting or fleeing is not an option. And this happens a lot with children, who often are being harmed by someone who's bigger, faster, stronger. And so there's less options. And so often, so what can happen is the child can become activated internally, but frozen on the outside. And remember, I said that oftentimes our brain will create these templates for future responses. And not always, it's not always this way, but people as adults can maybe have responses like a freeze response in a situation that's automatic, when maybe there could be other options. So just to summarize my overview of trauma and resilience, there is a biological impact of trauma, and that the survival responses are also biological. And it's important to look at things that survival from the biological standpoint as opposed to mental weakness, and to help build empathy and understanding, and understand like unexpected responses of survivors or individuals. And then it also highlights the importance of social protection to support opportunities and growth for individuals. So thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Kimberly, for framing that all for us. I think it's so critical in these conversations about women that we really have a deep understanding of what it's like to exist in an environment where trauma is sort of part of our daily lives. So now I'm really proud to transition to the work of the students at California State University, Northridge in the Criminology and Justice Studies Department. I have the privilege of teaching a class that focuses on human rights in the criminal justice system, and working with the students to understand and address the impacts of the criminal legal system on the lived experiences of the people that it affects every day. Each of the students that's presenting today, along with others in the class, has worked to understand the topics that we're talking about today and the potential remedies that can effectively address them. The students that are presenting today have worked with teams and they've been nominated by their teams to be the spokespeople. So we just want to be sure that we acknowledge that it was a group of folks that worked on putting really all this data together. So they've researched these issues and developed a set of recommendations that they're going to share with you. The first set of speakers to present will be Kai Bacani and Jennifer Vasquez, who are going to focus on the issue of gender-based violence and social protection. Then Florentino Gonzalez and Emily Valdez will center their comments around incarceration and social protection. And finally, Christopher Salter and Isabella Roby will discuss reentry and social protection. So we'll go ahead and start with Kai. Kai, are you ready?
Hi, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay, great.
Okay. Uh, Thank you so much, Professor Lapertu, and thank you to everyone for attending this conference. As Professor Lapertu said, my name is Kai, and I'm actually a fourth-year student at California State University of Northridge. Today, I'm here to talk about gender-based violence. When thinking about domestic violence, we come to an understanding that it has become a prominent health crisis globally in today's society. As a public health concern, it has not only become an issue for the criminal justice system, but it's also an issue that we as a society must come together to find solutions for. Gender-based violence survivors have always been depicted as victims, which in return has created a societal standard that views gender-based violence and domestic violence as nothing but negative connotations. And through these majority viewpoints and set opinions on those affected by gender-based violence, many of them do not have the confidence for help, as many of those who want to have seen experiences that did not have a desirable outcome. There is a prominent need for resources and support to build trust within this minority of individuals, which in return can benefit not only the survivors, but us as a society. Support that we as a society can adopt and implement is one-stop shop. One-stop shop in general is an organization or actual building as a whole that implements a multitude of resources or services. With gender-based violence in mind, implementing an organization or center model that provides a multitude of services for survivors of gender-based violence is highly beneficial. Having one model being standardized internationally can not only benefit not only survivors, but also the government and society as a whole. Derived from the influence of the model created by Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital in Zambia and Kenya, taxpaying money towards these one-stop shops benefits to its highest potential. And having more solidified standards helps society recognize and change their viewpoints on what gender-based violence truly is. Having these centers being enclosed within hospitals, which include both mental and physical help, alongside legal support and law enforcement, could give survivors the ability to access all the resources in one go in a discrete manner. Gender-based violence is fluid, meaning that we can all agree that there is a common definition to define it, but the actions itself within it are not the same. Therefore, having different resources in one place can help survivors find a sense of comfortability and resources from the first initial visit, which many who seek help may not want to go to multiple times due to fear. Creating these centers and more accessible resources for rehabilitation of survivors after initial reports of abuse is essential in creating consistency and giving them the ability to rebuild themselves. Including these centers, providing accessible resources to food, housing, jobs, and many more other opportunities would help ensure rehabilitation and consistency after initial violence. Including fee waivers, which insist survivors with fees they may not be able to pay for, such as filing legalities, being able to provide food and shelter for oneself and others, such as their own children, as well as affording health care. Though it may seem something small, being able to provide fee waivers opens bigger doors for survivors who were initially not able to leave their violent environments for a multitude of reasons, such as financial, professional, and educational. Considering intimate partner violence and violence against women and girls, the World Bank organization has influenced our way of thinking in our team about fee waivers as being able to fund and integrate these policies to enact. My co-speaker Jenny, in regards to gender-based violence, will elaborate further in the importance of fee waivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. To recap on what free waivers are, free waivers offers services for essential goods for low cost or no cost at all, depending on certain cases. The common forms of help that this social protection program provides is health insurance exemptions or reducing medical fees. Fee waivers could grant service to women who may have been affected by domestic violence. Free waivers could reduce expenses for services like medical specialists like psychiatrists, mental health being one of the main problems in today's society that needs more attention. Domestic violence or intimate partner violence is commonly involved with mental, physical, or economic abuse, threats being one of the few mental abuses that could result in physical abuse, often leading to death. Economic abuse prevents domestic violence victims from being financially freedom, making it difficult for them from leaving. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 5 states, "No one shall be subject to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment." That includes domestic violence. No human should endure torture or cruel punishment. Experiencing something traumatic could potentially be the cause of post-traumatic stress disorder. Free waivers could prevent services like safe spaces where victims are able to talk about their abuse one-on-one or with a group, and providing hospital services that include specialty hospitals for a controlled and safe environment that could create distance for potential triggers. Without the help, women who have been traumatized have a higher chance of depression. Depression is a common outcome that could lead to suicide from everything being bottled up. Free waivers could provide services that could prevent future harm to others or themselves. Mental health has a huge part in one's life, keeping one sane. Additionally, alongside free waivers, maternity and parental leave plays a vital role in helping survivors affected by gender-based violence. The Social Protection Program, maternity and parental leave, grants job security for single parent women who risk unemployment while they nurture their children. Many of those who are affected by gender-based violence often are mothers and or fathers and occur normally within a woman's pregnancy. Unfortunately, many standardize and normalize gender-based violence within their daily lives, as many face financial and economic hardships, which make it difficult to achieve their own independence from their abuser. The importance of maternity leave lies within Article 25 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it states everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for a health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, or old age, or the lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. That includes pregnancy. The ability to use the social protection given survivors the opportunity to grant the independence that did not seem achievable before, and alongside one-stop shop, free waivers, and maternity leave, it gives the survivors a higher chance of success when given the opportunity to obtain or any all of these social protection systems. We need to be aware when discussing our response to domestic violence is to consider how it affects different demographics, especially families with different cultures, economic and religious backgrounds. Creating these preventive measurements can help us identify and find inclusive within solutions in order to address personal concerns on a global scale. Intersectionality and diversity as a whole is not only something that is defiable, but becoming more prominent as we grow as a society. The importance of us being able to use our platform as a first world country is important as we grow and develop as a society. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Emily, I wasn't quite ready for you to finish it. Thank you. I'm sorry, Jenny. All right, thanks so much, Kai and Jennifer. Okay, now we're going over to Florentino and Emily, who will center their comments around incarceration. Florentino is having some problems with his webcam, so he won't be on video, but Emily will be on video after he finishes. Florentino?
Yes, thank you, Professor. And sorry again for the webcam issues. My subject that me and my partner will go over is women and incarceration. It is a fact that the United States for decades now has been the world leader in incarceration, with the prison policy initiative stating around 1.9 million people are incarcerated in the United States as of 2023, with 10% of that population being women. This number has been growing steadily for years now, with the total number of incarcerated women in the year 2000 being only 38,000 women, compared to the most recent numbers that places the total amount to be around 190,000. Women were also noted to have multiple different reasons compared to men that they are arrested and incarcerated. Women are statistically less likely to commit violent offenses than men, but they are also more likely to be arrested for drug or property offenses. With information like this and the rise of the female populations in jails and prisons, it's also a concerning trend to see our government seemingly take away medical services and medical rights away from women. For example, the repealing of Roe v. Wade, and many states attempting to ban and or criminalize women who are trying to access reproductive medical care services. One recent example is the Alabama Supreme State Court decision to give non-implanted embryos the same rights as children, which could criminalize the practice of IVF and criminalize mothers, as the disposal of non-viable embryos is a common practice and is both agreed upon by the IVF treatment centers and the donors of those eggs. The failure of the United States to protect these rights is also a clear violation of the CEDAW Treaty, which we have not ratified, but we should hold as an example, as we are a signatory of. Specifically, Article 12, which states that medical rights for women must be protected to avoid gender-based discrimination and, at worst, criminalization of the female body. The way we can address this is for the states or the federal government to pass legislation, at least banning the passing of a new bill that may criminalize women for purchasing or undergoing medical procedures like IVF or abortion. Some steps forward that our government has done has been the Reproductive Rights Task Force. That is a task force specifically noted to examine and counteract any state laws that may be put into place that violate federal laws in terms of female reproductive rights. And also Biden's executive order to protect access to reproductive health and stop states from violating federal law when it comes to abortion. Another important factor is, as the American female prisoner population is growing, many American prisons do not have the resources to address the specific health needs of female prisoners. For example, stated compared to men, women are more likely to be arrested for drug offenses, according to the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. Women are also 67 women who are incarcerated are 60-70% victims of childhood sexual and physical violence, and are also 70-80% victims of adult intimate partner violence, meaning that mental health and trauma services are needed in the prisons, in addition to pregnancy and child care, which shows the wide gap in needs compared to male prison populations. One study from Louisiana exemplifies that the biggest healthcare barriers for incarcerated women are long wait times, punishment for seeking care, lack of providers and services such as mental health or preventative cares. Ways that the U.S. could mitigate and address these problems is the adoption of the Bangkok Accords and ratifying that, as long as CEDAWs, The Bangkok Accords are, of course, a set of UN rules that focus on state and federal prisons, giving a unified set of rules and rights that women who are incarcerated are in, and would give our country a good first step into supporting the rights that we have agreed as a signatory to give to our female population. Thank you, and now I will pass it on to my partner, Emily.
Thank you, Florentino. Again, my name is Emily Valdez, and to start off, I would like to state that according to a report done by the Human Impact Partners, 405 million are invested in women's prisons in California alone. There are 172,000 women incarcerated in the United States. While roughly 10% of the total incarcerated population, women still represent a large portion of people in prisons and jails than in previous decades, a number that is seen to be increasing every year. According to data research from prisonpolicies.org, women hold the highest rate of homelessness due to incarceration. As politicians are now creating new laws that are specifically targeting women and the rights to women's health, and the number of women facing jail time is only going to continue to increase. Overall, violating economic, social, and human rights towards women. Nearly 150,000 incarcerated mothers will spend the day apart from their children. Over half, 58% of all women in the United States prisons are mothers, as are 80% of women in jails, including many who are incarcerated awaiting trial simply because they cannot afford bail. Through this system of quickly incarcerating women, all rights are taken away and even violated, especially considering women who are pregnant and or have children. Women are no longer able to accept work. Special protections for pregnant women before and after birth are taken away, and being stripped from a child to be incarcerated can be considered a sense of torture for a mother. There are no true social protections that cover women's rights, especially when it comes to their children and being incarcerated. As one can see, state, local, and federal laws are being used to turn away from the proper health care women need, and are using this to incarcerate women looking for their proper health care needs. The alternative for some of these offenses that are specifically targeting women should not lead to high incarceration and having children stripped from their care. Through a safe housing project as an alternative to incarceration, not only are women's human and social rights protected, but families are also kept together. A safe housing project will not only allow women to stay with their children, but will also allow them to serve their time in the court of law. This allows women to stay at a housing project that provides them with a sufficient sized room to stay with their children, to be able to present themselves at court-appointed workplace to serve their community service, and to have a caseworker checking in daily to provide a weekly progress report in the efforts to convey to the court of their individual progress. Through the application of fee waivers, the prices of essential goods and services are kept at a low cost. The social protection of allowances can be given for the work being provided through community service. In doing so, not only are women's social rights being protected, but they are also earning money to save and to have at the end of their sentencing. This can allow pregnant women to still have access to prenatal care that may not be available during incarceration. Allowing women to have health insurance exceptions and providing reduced medical fees, not only are the women serving their time, but are also being set to succeed later in life, and creates the need of success for the unborn child. Instead of investing in the separation of families, their future, and the incarceration of women, the focus should be on ways to keep families together and protect economic, social, and cultural rights, specifically when it comes to low-end offenses that can be dealt with differently than focusing on excessive jail time. By using a safe housing project and fee waivers, social protections will continue to be protected, and women can have the opportunity to stay with their children, have a healthy birth, and be prepared for the future ahead, all while serving their given sentencing and community service. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll turn to our last group of students from the class. Christopher Salter and Isabella Roby will talk about reentry and social protection. Christopher?
Okay. Hello, my name is Christopher Salter. I will go over how crucial it is for formerly incarcerated people to understand the impact that secure and supportive housing, equal employment opportunities, and healthcare can have as they transition. For many women, the challenges are intensified by the factors such as limited resources, the lack of family support, and the stigma associated with their past. Transitional housing emerges as a beacon of hope in these circumstances, offering a safe place where women can begin their journey towards a brighter future. Women Organizing Reentry Communities of Color, or WORCC for short, is a program that works to make sure women of color, such as African American and Latinx women, can improve their financial well-being. Through WORCC, over 550 women and over 550 formerly incarcerated women have received services including employment assistance, housing, education assistance, and healthcare access. The women who are part of the program shared that their participation helped heal from their past traumas and pain. Not only does transitional housing provide a stable environment for women, it also offers them a place to call home, a sanctuary where they can find solace and security. This stability is not just physical, but also emotional, as it gives a sense of belonging and a community, which are both essential for rebuilding lives. Such housing programs offer critical support services tailored to unique needs of women leaving the prison system, from job training and educational opportunities to mental health counseling and substance abuse treatment. These services are made to equip women with the tools that they need to reintegrate successfully into society. Transitional housing programs work tirelessly to reunite families, offering a chance for mothers to rebuild relationships with their children and families in a safe and supportive environment. When a woman walks out of a prison gate, her release signifies more than just the end of a sentence. It marks the beginning of her reestablishing her life and rebuilding her connections. However, the hurdles that she faced are numerous, and one of the most significant challenges is finding employment. Research shows that access to stable employment drastically reduces the likelihood of reoffending. Another program by the name of A New Way of Life, which was established in 1998 by Susan Burton, aims to help rebuild the lives of formerly incarcerated women. Ms. Burton rose above a life of poverty, violence, and loss, and was brought into the cycle of mass incarceration for nearly 2 decades. After being released from prison for the 6th time, she was finally able to access recovery services in the city of Los Angeles. She created a New Way of Life reentry project to provide the resources she wished she had, such as housing, case management, and leadership development, which are essential for people rebuilding their lives after incarceration. With women being the fastest growing group in the criminal justice system, their employment options are limited with a background like theirs. Incarcerated women report higher mental health problems with more frequent victimization and substance use. Studies have shown that certain factors such as longer criminal history, unemployment, unstable housing, and lack of social ties have been factors that lead to an individual reoffending. In prison, women's healthcare needs are also overlooked and their access to healthcare is very limited. When released, women rarely utilize basic health services. They are frequently burdened with health issues, both physical and mental, that have gone untreated or unaddressed during their time in confinement. Trauma experienced within correctional facilities can have lasting effects on mental health. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, and substance abuse disorders are all common. These women are more likely to suffer from chronic conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, and also asthma, often caused by the stressors of incarceration. Nancy Busan highlights the constant problem related to women with prior incarceration by stating women parolees are released with no money, no medication, and no housing, just the problems they are left to face. It creates limited options it creates limited options, and when those that are present, the regular results are crime. Some are released with depression or other mental health problems that end up running rampant because of the lack of medications and money. IPE, or other words, interprofessional education, is defined as learning with, from, and about each other and sharing different perspectives while learning together in areas of common interest in the practice of healthcare. IPE engages students from different health professions together during all part of their professional training in order to promote collaborative teamwork and professional practice. Thank you for listening. Those are the important factors that I wanted to discuss. I will pass it on to my coworker.
Hello, I'm Isabella. So it is a well-known fact that the United States is among the wealthiest nations globally. Nevertheless, despite the abundance of resources and the support provided to female offenders reintegrating into society, the execution of assistance programs falls short of anticipated outcomes. This disparity between the availability of resources and their efficient utilization poses a significant obstacle to the successful integration of female offenders. The Bureau of Justice Statistics data shows that annually 600,000 to 650,000 individuals are discharged from state and federal correctional facilities. However, the reentry process poses significant challenges, such as lack of housing, limited access to services, and inadequate support networks. Without stable housing and services, reentry success is jeopardized, leading to potential disruptions or new arrests during the reintegration period. The 2022 Bureau of Justice Assistance report highlights that the need to address these issues for successful reintegration. The International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights emphasizes the right to an adequate standard of living, including essentials like food, clothing, and housing. Article 11 of the Covenant stresses the continuous improvement of living conditions as a fundamental right. The U.S. parties are required to take appropriate measures and recognize the importance of international cooperation through voluntary participation. By following these principles, governments can play a crucial role in supporting individuals leaving correctional facilities to reintegrate successfully into society. The revolving door pattern in which individuals go in and out of prison is linked to an increased likelihood of homelessness. However, efficient interagency systems can help address homelessness among those recently released from incarceration. The United States must establish effective support mechanisms for formerly incarcerated individuals to help break the cycle of repeated imprisonment and release. Research indicates that women of color face higher rates of unsheltered homelessness compared to white women. The reentry process for individuals leaving prison is heavily dependent on having stable housing. Our research indicates that a significant number of formerly incarcerated face challenges in securing a permanent residence. This difficulty is exacerbated by discriminatory practices from both public housing agencies and private landlords, as well as the limited availability of affordable housing options. These factors collectively contribute to the ongoing exclusion of formerly incarcerated individuals from the housing sector. Addressing the issue of stable housing for former offenders is crucial in facilitating their successful integration into society. Without a secure place to live, individuals leaving prison are more likely to face obstacles in finding employment, accessing social services, and maintaining stability in their lives. By recognizing the importance of stable housing as a fundamental component for reentry programs, policymakers and stakeholders can work towards creating more inclusive housing policies that support the rehabilitation and reintegration of formerly incarcerated individuals. Limited employment opportunities are also a challenge for women in the criminal justice system, as they are the fastest growing group within it. These women often face higher rates of mental health issues, victimization, and substance abuse. Research indicates that factors like lengthy criminal history, unemployment, unstable housing, and a lack of social support contribute to their involvement in criminal activities. The Becker-Freeman Institute has conducted research that reveals a significant decline in the labor market activity as a result of incarceration. During the period of serving a sentence, both employment rates and earning experience a sharp decline. This decline can attribute to the inherent limitations of being incarcerated, as individuals are unable to participate in the regular labor market while behind bars. It is crucial to understand that avoiding imprisonment alone is not enough to address the challenges faced by individuals involved in the criminal justice system. While this finding does not undermine the concerns surrounding mass incarceration,
It does indicate there are other factors at play that contribute to low earnings among those who have been previously incarcerated. These factors can include various types of interactions within the criminal justice system or pre-existing detachment from the labor market. To effectively improve the labor market outcomes of individuals impacted by incarceration, it is essential for future research to delve deeper into these factors. By gaining a better understanding of these upstream influences, policymakers and stakeholders can make more targeted investments that address the specific needs of this population. That is it.
Thank you. You can see why I'm so proud every time we do this. Okay, on that note, I'm actually going to turn it over to Lily Gonzalez, who's from Project Rebound at CSUN, and she's going to give us a little bit of perspective on some of the issues that we've been talking about. Lily?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the students for doing your research and for presenting so well on issues of women's incarceration. Thank you so much. And so again, hello everybody. My name is Lily Gonzalez. I work for Project Rebound here at California State University Northridge. And just to echo some of what has already been shared, right? When women go to prison, we know that it's usually for crimes of poverty or for trauma or something that has been unaddressed, which only gets exacerbated while incarcerated. So what does women's incarceration look like? So for one, I look at this through like the lens of genocide. If we look at the definition from the United Nations, which says any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So I think somebody spoke earlier about separating how families are separated as a result of incarceration and how incarceration is a mechanism of family separation, right? Also while incarcerated, so I look at that separation, right, from mothers to their children as a form of state sanctioned violence. And just building off of that, when you are incarcerated, you have no consent over your body. And connected to that, recently in LA County, we had the largest payout in LA County history, which was for the unconstitutional strip searches experienced by incarcerated women, to which the county said in a statement that the settlement marks a significant resolution of a deeply troubling period in which tens of thousands of women were strip searched with intrusive methods and inadequate privacy. I was one of the women that was a part of that class action lawsuit. And there was also an article that ran that talks about Me Too behind bars and the experiences of women that are incarcerated, more specifically at Valley State Prison, where I was at. We had Dr. Henrik, who performed illegal sterilizations to incarcerated women. He retired in 2012 and I was released in 2011. So our times there overlaps. And when he was interviewed about this, he said that the money spent in sterilizing inmates was minimal compared to what you save in welfare paying for these unwanted children. So that's just the system that women are incarcerated under, right? And just to kind of, also mothering, right? How do you mother from inside? So thinking about all of these things that you experience while you're incarcerated, you can only imagine what coming home looks like. And some of you all touched on it and what is needed, right? So currently in California, we're working on something called the CARE Act, which would be for women that are pregnant and arrested. They will have a pregnancy test and be supported to fight their case outside of incarceration, and I think up to 12 weeks postpartum. So that's something that's in the works here in California. And the priority for women that are coming home is family reunification, because mothers are the primary caretakers of their children. So when you're incarcerated, you find yourself having to make long-term or short-term custody agreements, right? So like I mentioned, family reunification is the big focus for women. Finding employment oftentimes is very difficult, right? If you look at women's unemployment rates, and for unemployment rates of people that are formerly incarcerated, they are larger than the Great Depression, when we had the most folks that were unemployed. And in California, we have passed something that's called ban the box, where we no longer are supposed to ask you if you've been convicted of a felony on a job application, but that has not translated into more jobs necessarily. And some of the ways that we can address reentry, or some of the support programs that I came home to, and I'll speak from my experience. I came home to Homeboy Industries, which some of y'all may have heard of. It's a large organization here. And I also heard one of the students talk about Susan Burton. I actually worked at A New Way of Life when I first came home, and A New Way of Life, yes, they support women that are previously incarcerated and support with family reunification and policy work and all of that. But Susan is also doing work that's preventative. I have called her many times where I've had situations where I'm dealing with a young woman, and if her not getting housing means she's going to be incarcerated. So we've been able to house people. And again, just kind of going back to what's already been stated, right? The reasons that women are going to prison are because of crimes of survival, right? Decriminalizing sex work, decriminalizing poverty. And I'm sorry, I'm like all over the place because I'm excited about this. And again, when people come home, they have over 48,000 collateral consequences that they have to navigate. We want to ensure that when people come home, are not limited by their carceral experiences or return back to a carceral setting. So we know programs like Project Rebound are important, because we know that that can expand people's life opportunities. And that's really what we want to do. And I think that's my time, right?
Yes, we can move on to Leona. I was hoping maybe you could just spend like maybe 2 minutes talking a little bit more about what Project Rebound is, because I know
Yeah.
it's all through the state, and maybe it's a program that somebody in another state or country might take on.
Yeah, so Project Rebound has been around since 1967. It was started by a previously incarcerated professor, Dr. John Irwin, and San Francisco State. And the goal of Project Rebound is to support people that are currently incarcerated or were once incarcerated and want to continue their higher education journey. So recidivism rates, and this might be a little old, but I think it was in the first 3 years, 73% or 63% of people go back to incarceration, right? So our recidivism rate with Project Rebound is actually 0. And we are now currently, I want to say, in 18 of the 23 CSUs, and we are a line item in the governor's budget. And so we try to address a lot of basic needs here, right? Like food is a big issue, childcare for students. Like, once you're here and you've done all the things, how do we ensure that you stay here? And we know that higher education, again, is going to expand life opportunities, not only for you, but also for our children. Yeah, and so.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you
all for having me.
I'm happy to have my tax dollars be a line item for Project Rebound. So
thank you.
Okay, let's turn now to Leona Smith DiFaustino. She's currently serving as the clinical director for Worker Education and Resource Center. She's been a longtime advocate for women with specific expertise on gender-based violence. She's a licensed clinical social worker whose focus has been on community-centered social work. She's worked with people experiencing gender-based violence, youth in detention settings, and supported women's reentry through capacity development and systems change. Currently, she's engaged in the work of developing effective strategies to support those reentering the workforce to ensure their capacity to live lives of dignity and well-being. Leona is going to share with us some of the work of her organization and why the strategies they employ are an important jumping off point to addressing poverty. Leona?
Thank you. I'm going to show PowerPoint because I just keep talking. So this is going to make sure that I stay accountable to everyone.
That's why I use PowerPoint.
And that's why we're friends. Let me go ahead and start from the beginning. So as mentioned, I'm Leona. I'm at an organization called Worker Education Resource Center. We're located in Los Angeles, like the Westlake Pico Union area, but we serve all of Los Angeles County, and we also do some program across the state of California. I wanted to start off with just some grounding of, why it's important to talk about women and labor. Well, first off, women still are paid less than men. And what we find is the pay gap worsens with age. And so as we're talking about all of the disparities that women experience, part of that in incarceration is that if you are away for a significant amount of time, you're coming into a labor force that is already disproportionately going to stigmatize you, right? Purely for your age. Women experience occupational segregation, so low wage earning based on particular jobs. And oftentimes women, that occupational segregation is in care work. And we know that care work is statistically really underpaid compared to other labor sectors. And caregiving disparities impact women's employment. And so Lily talked a little bit about like the intersection of that when women are incarcerated. And so when you think about what that does, like having to worry about caring for, and when we say caregiving, it's not just children, it's other adults in one's life and things like that. And we saw the real disparity of this once COVID came about, right? And we entered into the pandemic, and women were having to leave the labor market in large numbers. So at work, we have a mission to support workers experiencing barriers to employment and connecting them to and retaining good, stable, and permanent jobs. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what those good, stable, and permanent jobs mean. But within our mission is this idea that within good, permanent, and stable jobs, you improve someone's quality of life. Because we live in a capitalist society and you need to work to earn and care for yourself. And so we want to make sure that you are having equity within a system that is oftentimes set up to really disenfranchise a lot of us. Now, the ways in which we do that is we are oriented through our theory of change. And our theory of change is really centered around workforce equity and the degree in which we are ensuring that the labor force has all of these different partners working in collaboration to ensure that people have those good, stable, and permanent jobs, right? So that we can really impact their quality of life. And we have 3 areas within our theory of change that we focus on. That's worker training and whole person supports. The other is employer partnerships and capacity building. And the third is thought leadership and systems level change. I'm going to go in a little bit about what those 3 look like, but the first is really making sure that job seekers and incumbents have access to professional development and training that puts them in a career path, right? My dad always used to joke, you don't want a job, you want a career, because anyone can do a job, but a career is something that you can feel connected to and you can feel like you can grow in. And so within our worker trainings, we're really making sure that we're, one, identifying those folks that have barriers to employment and making sure that any systemic disparities that they could impact, that can impact their ability to not only get the job but retain the job, are addressed within the training program. We also look at whole person supports, because what we find is getting employed in itself is a hurdle, but there are so many factors that impact just getting employed. And so we make sure that we have case management services and retention services for all of our job seekers. And we also provide stipends, because we tell someone to come do a training and oftentimes they have to quit their jobs, their low wage earning jobs, to do this training. So we like to give them a stipend that can hopefully help balance out any other economic things that are going on for them. And then we provide them with other whole person services like cash cards for gas or bus. I was going to say bus tokens, but that makes me sound really old. Also, if they're having any food insecurity, they have money that can carry them through those trainings for that. The employer partnership and capacity building is then we go, okay, well, we can get people ready for a job, but we're putting them in systems that are not healthy for them, right? And there's systems that are going to contribute to more disparity. So we really have to work with those systems directly and say, okay, you want good workers, we want to give you good workers, but you need to make sure that you have an environment that supports those good workers. And then the third is our thought leaderships and system level change. And that's where, as a social worker, we talk about micro, meso, and macro. We're really going to that macro level and saying, well, what are the policies? What are the laws? What is the legislation that is really centering around workforce equity? And how are we making sure that we're involved in those processes? And so when you break it down, the activities that we do within our different theories of change, the first theory of change, we have specific job readiness programs. And so for Los Angeles County, we're one of the approved training providers for preparing Los Angeles County for employment. And that's where Los Angeles County, through the Department of Economic Opportunity, identifies different offices or departments within LA County. It could either be our Department of Health Services or Department of Mental Health. And these are entry-level positions that they often struggle to not only get people in, but retain them. And if folks aren't familiar with a lot of how civil service works, you have to take exams for it. And we know that any type of exam is often a barrier to folks in general, right? And so they need entry-level folks, but oftentimes taking the exam is that barrier. And so we work with training people to be prepared to do the job. Our trainings also look at, and I hate saying this, hard skills and soft skills because they're all important skills, but skills, so if we're training folks to be custodial workers, skills that help you be a custodial worker, but also skills that help you be a worker, like healthy work boundaries, looking at the ways in which cultural humility is really important as a worker, making sure that you know how to communicate in an ethical manner, right? And then you just sort of drop down into some of our other trainings. We right now are looking at how harm reduction is a place in which they are asking people with lived experience to do that work. And so that means that people who are formerly incarcerated, people who have substance usage, people who were involved in or currently involved in sex work. Well, we want to make sure that those workers know what it means to work in a healthy way from a place of lived experience. We used to have a program where we trained Black women to go and be EMTs because we recognize that there is racial and gender disparity amongst EMTs that becomes a pipeline to joining the fire department and becoming a paramedic. And so this was a program in which we identified that direct disparity and we said, hey, let's do something about that. And then union jobs. So we were birthed out of a collaborative relationship with SEIU 721. And we know that part of being able to have good, stable jobs is really union representation because you have those folks that are able to collectively work together and hold labor accountable. And then I mentioned our whole person care. So those supportive services like case management. We also provide 12 sessions of counseling for folks looking at making sure that they have any kind of financial compensation that allows them to stay in the program. And then retention services. So once someone has successfully completed our program, they've been hired, they have a retention services coordinator who's able to work with them and ensure that any continual barriers that could prevent them from staying employed are addressed immediately. Theory 2 is when I talked about that middle ground. So employer partner meetings, we have leadership and enrichment trainings, and some of the examples of those are specifically within the harm reduction field, because you can have a really great worker, but if you have a really bad manager or leader, you're going to have a lot of recidivism and you're going to have a lot of issues with toxic environments. And so that's something that's really important. The other thing is making sure that our employer partners understand the significance of retention services and the significance of having that worked into their model and collaborating and working with us around those retention services. The third theory of change is that thought leadership and systems level change. And so some of the things that we've worked on from that policy perspective is equity audits for Los Angeles County and California. We're a high road training partner organization. And so really committing to this idea of it takes a lot of work to not only create good, stable jobs, but create pipelines by which people can get into those good, stable jobs. We created a landscape analysis for behavioral health workforce because there is a high need for the behavioral health workforce and workers, but there's a lot of disparity that exists within that and a lot of harm that is happening within that field. And so we wanted to bring to light some of the things that occur with that. Lily mentioned ban the box, right? And so we've worked within Los Angeles County to really educate people about fair chance policy, which directly impacts folks in reentry, and the idea that you can legislate something at the state level, but how does it actually make it into the counties and into employers' inboxes, for lack of a better word, so that it's actually actionable and it's something that's done continually. And then at the state level, we had a program called Pathway to State Services, and really looking at equity in the public sector. And so that equity, as I mentioned with LA County, is this idea, if we're having public service and we want to make sure that there is no nepotism and we want to make sure there's equity, and so we create exams or we create these steps and all these other things, are we really being aware that it's locking out people that the state or our counties are saying we really want to serve and we want to make sure that we're providing services to? And then lastly, as an organization, we recognize that we have to have labor equity commitments for ourselves. So, whatever we say outward facing has to be something that's inward facing. And that means that we are also a union shop. We have union represented employees, right? We have our job labor management meetings in which we talk about issues that are coming up. We provide 100% health benefits, which is something that we're really committed to, because some of the things that keep people away from employment and sustain employment is the idea of, your health benefits are really hard to maintain. We have a 401k, and the agency provides 6% contribution automatically, right? We talked about this idea of pensions and retirement and the ways in which particularly women are disproportionately impacted by lack of retirement and the capacity to care for themselves as they age out. And we know that in care work and social services, we're disproportionately represented by women. So we want to make sure that that's something as an agency we can commit to. We also provide every year a $500 professional development stipend. And that is so that, people want to continue to grow within the organization, within their job, really looking at how they have fulfillment as workers so they can feel good and committed, and that quality of life is something that's achieved. And in general, we are a trauma-informed organization. So those practices and principles that are woven into our mission and vision and woven into our practices outward facing also have to be included inward facing. And so that means that we have a wellness committee that puts together activities, and it has to move beyond just like potlucks or things like that. We're really always constantly thinking about, well, what does it mean to keep a well environment for our workers? And that's all I have. I kept a time, I think.
Okay, excellent. I mean, potlucks are good.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well,
You know how I feel.
Thank you. I do know how you feel. Thanks so much to Leona and Kimberly and Lily and the students, and of course Abby, who's been sort of behind the scenes making sure that our community is safe here. We want to thank so much for everybody for joining us today to really look at the interconnections of poverty and gender-based violence, incarceration, and the challenges that are faced for people who are re-entering society after a carceral sentence. While the U.S. is an economic powerhouse in the world, at home, women are really unable to access that idea of an American dream, largely because of poverty and inequality. So we hope that you've discovered some ideas that can support women, and that you continue to advocate for women's well-being and equality through acknowledging the importance of economic inequality and its intersections with issues significantly impacting women's lives, like gender-based violence and incarceration. If you want more information on the things that we've shared today, we have that info up on our conference site. And certainly we encourage you to explore the work of Kimberly and Leona and Lily in their other environments at work or at Project Rebound, or even Kimberly's work with Trauma Resource Institute and in her private practice. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to continued collaboration around supporting women's power. Thanks everybody.